The morning sun barely reached through the small window of the county animal shelter, casting weak shadows on the concrete floor. In the corner kennel, a pit bull lay motionless, his chocolate-brown coat dulled by illness and neglect. The shelter staff had started calling him Rocky, inspired by his fighter's spirit that somehow kept him going despite everything he'd been through. Just 3 weeks ago, a local construction worker had found Rocky huddled behind some trash cans near a building site. The poor dog was in terrible shape. His skin was raw and infected from severe mange. His ribs showed through his coat, and his eyes were clouded with pain and fear. The worker couldn't just leave him there, so he called the shelter right away. "He's one of the worst cases I've seen in my 15 years here," whispered Rita, the senior shelter supervisor, to her colleague. She knelt by Rocky's kennel, trying to encourage him to eat something from her hand. The dog lifted his head slightly, his gentle eyes meeting hers, but he had no interest in the food. Rita's heart sank. She'd seen that look before, when animals simply lost their will to keep fighting. The shelter's medical room had become like a second home to Rocky. Every day, the staff would clean his wounds, apply medicine to his mange-ridden skin, and give him antibiotics for his infections. They took turns sitting with him, talking softly and trying to remind him that not all humans were bad. Sometimes, one of the younger volunteers would read storybooks to him, her quiet voice echoing in the concrete hallway. But despite everyone's best efforts, Rocky wasn't getting better. The mange had spread to almost 70% of his body, making his skin crack and bleed. The infections weren't responding to the antibiotics like they should, and he'd stopped eating regularly. The shelter's tight budget was stretching thinner by the day. Specialized medicines and treatments weren't cheap, and they had dozens of other animals to care for too. During feeding time, other dogs would bark excitedly, tails wagging as they waited for their meals. But Rocky remained silent, his tail still, his spirit seeming to fade a little more each day. The shelter staff would talk to him, trying to spark some life in those stout eyes. "Come on, buddy," they'd encourage, "you've got to eat something." Sometimes he'd take a few small bites, but mostly he'd just turn his head away. The regular shelter visitors noticed Rocky too. Children would stop at his kennel, pointing and asking their parents what was wrong with the sick dog. The staff would gently explain that Rocky was very ill, but they were doing their best to help him. Some kind visitors even donated extra money specifically for his care, touched by his gentle nature despite his suffering. One particular morning, Rocky didn't even lift his head when Rita came to check on him. His breathing was shallow and his skin felt hot to the touch. The medicine bottles were running low, and the latest blood tests showed his condition was worse than ever. The shelter's veterinarian had been monitoring him closely, becoming more concerned with each passing day. The other dogs in the shelter seemed to sense something was wrong. The usually noisy kennel block grew quieter whenever someone would stop at Rocky's cage. Even the chatty beagle next door, who barked at everything and everyone, would only whimper softly when the medical team came to treat Rocky. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shelter windows, Rita sat with Rocky, gently stroking the few patches of healthy fur on his head. She thought about all the animals she'd helped over the years, all the success stories that kept her going through the tough days. But looking at Rocky's suffering, she wondered if sometimes love and medical care just weren't enough. The shelter staff gathered for their end-of-day meeting, their faces grim as they discussed Rocky's deteriorating condition. The medical bills were mounting, his health was failing, and the shelter's resources were running dangerously low. They had to face the heartbreaking reality that sometimes, despite their best efforts and deepest wishes, they couldn't save them all. Little did they know that tomorrow would bring an unexpected visitor who would change everything, not just for Rocky, but for the entire shelter. But for now, as the evening settled in and the shelter lights dimmed, Rocky lay in his kennel, his future hanging by the thinnest of threads, while the staff went home with heavy hearts, knowing that tomorrow they might have to make the hardest decision of all. The next morning arrived at the shelter with a heavy silence. The usual chorus of barking seemed muted, as if the animals somehow sensed the weight of what was about to happen. Rita arrived earlier than usual, her hands clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She couldn't bring herself to drink it, her stomach in knots as she thought about the decision they had to make today. The shelter's veterinarian, Dr. Lee, walked through the main entrance, his medical bag feeling heavier than usual. He'd been doing this job for over 2 decades, But days like these never got easier. He nodded quietly to the staff members as he passed, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but they all knew why he was there so early. Rocky lay in his kennel, his breathing shallow but steady. The morning sun caught his face, highlighting the gentle brown eyes that had captured everyone's hearts despite his condition. A young volunteer was sitting cross-legged in front of his kennel, talking softly to him about her day of school, pretending this was just another normal morning. Her voice cracked slightly as she told him about the math test she'd just passed, knowing this might be the last story she'd get to share with him. The shelter staff had prepared a special breakfast for Rocky, bits of grilled chicken, his favorite on the rare days when his appetite returned. The food sat untouched in his bowl, just like yesterday's meal and the day before that. His medical chart hung on the kennel door, filled with notes, measurements, and treatments that had all failed to turn things around. The latest entries showed his weight dropping steadily, his temperature rising, and his blood work results getting worse. Rita gathered the morning shift staff in the break room. Their usual chatter about weekend plans and funny pet stories was replaced by a heavy silence. "We've done everything we could," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "The infections aren't responding to treatment anymore. His body is too weak to fight." The room remained quiet, save for a few sniffles and the distant sound of dogs barking. Dr. Lee reviewed Rocky's charts one last time, looking for anything they might have missed, any treatment they hadn't tried. But the numbers didn't lie. Rocky's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and keeping him alive would only prolong his suffering. The shelter's budget for medical care was already stretched thin, and they had other animals who needed help too. The staff took turns throughout the morning, spending a few minutes each with Rocky. They brought him his favorite blanket, the soft blue one that a kind donor had brought in last week. Someone even played soft music from their phone, those gentle classical tunes that sometimes seemed to ease his pain. The beagle next door had stopped his usual barking, as if offering a moment of respect. Around noon, Rita started making the necessary arrangements. The paperwork felt cold and formal, simple forms that couldn't capture the spirit of the dog they'd all grown to love, or the weeks of hope and heartbreak they'd been through together. She filled in the boxes with trembling hands, each check mark feeling like a personal defeat. The afternoon crept by slowly. Dr. Lee had scheduled the procedure for 4 p.m., giving everyone time to say their goodbyes. The shelter's photographer came by one last time, hoping to capture a few final pictures of Rocky, not for their records, but for the staff who'd grown so attached to him. Through her lens, she caught a moment when Rocky lifted his head slightly, his eyes showing a glimmer of the gentle soul that had endured so much. As the scheduled time approached, the shelter staff tried to keep their routines normal for the other animals' sake. They cleaned kennels, filled water bowls, and answered phones, all while watching the clock with heavy hearts. A few regular visitors who'd heard the news stopped by with cards and flowers, small gestures of support for the staff they knew would be hurting. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the shelter windows. Dr. Lee was preparing his equipment in the medical room, each movement deliberate and measured. Rita sat with Rocky, gently stroking his head, telling him how much everyone loved him and how sorry they were that they couldn't do more. Just then, the shelter's front door chimed unexpectedly. It was unusual for visitors to arrive this late in the day, especially on a weekday. Nobody paid much attention at first. They were all focused on Rocky and the difficult moments ahead. But within minutes, that late afternoon visitor would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, proving that sometimes hope arrives at the very last moment, wearing the most unexpected face. The shelter's front door opened, letting in a burst of late afternoon sunlight along with a girl who looked about 16 years old. She was carrying a worn backpack covered in animal rights pins and had a determined look in her eyes that made her seem older than her years. The staff recognized her as one of their weekend volunteers, though she didn't usually come in on weekdays after school. "I heard about Rocky," she said, slightly out of breath, as if she'd rushed there. "My mom said you're planning to." She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone knew what she meant. Rita noticed the girl was clutching a thick folder filled with papers, post-it notes sticking out from all sides. The girl had been volunteering at the shelter for almost a year now, spending her weekends cleaning kennels and walking dogs. She was quiet but dedicated, often staying late to comfort nervous animals or help with the extra duties nobody else wanted to do. The staff knew her as the one who never gave up on the difficult cases, the scared cats, the untrusting dogs, the ones others had labeled as hopeless. "I've been researching," she said, pulling out her folder and spreading papers across the front desk. "I found case studies of dogs who recovered from severe mange, even when traditional treatments weren't working." Her hands trembled slightly as she organized her notes, but her voice was steady. "There are alternative treatments we haven't tried yet. Look at this one. They used a combination of natural remedies with conventional medicine, and the success rate was really high." Reba and Dr. Lee exchanged glances. They'd tried everything they could think of, spent countless hours and resources trying to save Rocky. But something about this girl's determination made them pause. She wasn't just offering empty hope, she had research, data, and specific treatment plans spread out before them. "I know it's a lot to ask," the girl continued, pulling out more papers, "but I've been taking an online course about animal rehabilitation. My parents said I could foster Rocky at our house. We have a quiet spare room, perfect for a sick dog who needs peace to recover. My dad's a nurse. He can help monitor Rocky's condition. We've already set everything up just in case you'd say yes." The clock on the wall showed 3:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, they were supposed to end Rocky's suffering. Dr. Lee picked up one of the research papers, his eyebrows raising as he read through the methodology. The girl had found studies he hadn't seen before, alternative treatments that hadn't made it into mainstream veterinary journals yet. The shelter staff gathered around the desk, looking over the materials. The girl had created a detailed care plan, feeding schedules, treatment timelines, exercise routines for when Rocky got stronger. She'd even calculated the costs, showing how her family could help cover the expenses that were straining the shelter's budget. From his kennel, Rocky lifted his head slightly, perhaps responding to the unusual activity. The girl walked over to him, kneeling down slowly. Instead of showing his usual lethargy, Rocky's tail gave the faintest wag, just a small movement, but the first voluntary response he'd shown in days. She pulled something from her backpack, a small speaker. "I read about music therapy for sick animals," she explained, playing a soft classical piece. The gentle notes filled the kennel area, and Rocky's ears perked up ever so slightly. "See, he's responding. He wants to live. He just needs someone to believe in him." Rita looked at the clock again, 3:52 p.m. Time was running out, and they had to make a decision. The girl's plan wasn't just based on emotion. She had research, family support, and a structured approach to Rocky's rehabilitation. But more than that, she had that rare combination of hope and practicality that sometimes made impossible things possible. Dr. Lee studied Rocky's reaction to the music and the girl's presence. The dog's breathing seemed a bit stronger, his eyes a bit more focused. Sometimes, he knew, medicine alone wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed someone who could see possibility where others saw only endings. The shelter staff huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The girl waited, her hand resting gently on Rocky's kennel door, that soft music still playing. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows now, but instead of an ending, they seemed to be pointing toward a beginning. At 3:59 p.m., 1 minute before Rocky's scheduled appointment, Rita picked up the euthanasia paperwork from her desk. The room held its breath. Then, with a small smile, she tore the papers in half. "Okay," she said, looking at the girl whose determination had just changed everything. "Show us your plan. Let's give Rocky one more chance." The next few minutes were a blur of activity, forms being filled out, care instructions being discussed, arrangements being made. But through it all, Rocky kept his eyes fixed on the girl who had arrived just in time, bringing with her not just hope, but a whole new chapter in his story that nobody had thought possible just an hour ago. The spare room in the girl's house had been transformed into a peaceful sanctuary for Rocky. Soft blankets covered the floor, and gentle natural light filtered through sheer curtains. The walls were a calming light blue, and a small speaker quietly played the classical music that had first caught Rocky's attention at the shelter. That first evening was filled with nervous energy. The girl's parents helped set up Rocky's new space, making sure everything was perfect. Her father, true to his nursing background, had already organized all the medications and created a chart to track Rocky's vital signs. Her mother had prepared a special bone broth, hoping to tempt Rocky's absent appetite. "Take it slow," Reva had advised before they left the shelter. "He's been through a lot, and change can be scary even when it's good change." The girl took these words to heart. Instead of overwhelming Rocky with attention, she simply sat on the floor near him, reading her homework aloud in a soft voice. Every now and then, she'd glance his way, and to her delight, she'd catch him watching her. The first breakthrough came at midnight. The girl had insisted on sleeping on a mattress on the floor next to Rocky's bed, wanting him to know he wasn't alone. In the quiet darkness, she heard a small sound, the gentle lap of water. Rocky had gotten up on his own and taken his first proper drink in days. She pretended to be asleep, but her heart soared with hope. Morning brought another small victory. When the girl's father came to check Rocky's temperature, the dog lifted his head without prompting. His tail didn't wag yet, but his eyes followed their movements with new interest. The father and daughter exchanged excited looks. They both knew that engagement was the first step toward healing. Throughout that first week, the girl maintained her routine. She'd come home from school, do her homework in Rocky's room, and talk to him about her day. She never forced him to interact, but she made sure he knew she was there. She'd describe her classes, share funny stories about her teachers, and sometimes just sit quietly, letting him feel her peaceful presence. The classical music became their special thing. She researched which composers had the most calming effect on animals and created special playlists. Mozart seemed to be Rocky's favorite. His ears would perk up ever so slightly at the piano concertos. During these musical sessions, she'd notice his breathing becoming more relaxed, his body less tense. Then came the day that changed everything. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading her biology textbook, when she felt something warm against her knee. Rocky had silently moved closer, just enough for his body to barely touch her. She continued reading, her voice steady despite the tears of joy threatening to spill. It was the first time he'd initiated contact. The man was still there, his skin still raw and painful, but something in Rocky's eyes had changed. The dull, defeated look was being replaced by something else, a spark of interest, a glimmer of trust. During his daily medical treatments, he began to cooperate more, as if he finally understood they were trying to help him. One rainy afternoon, while the girl was explaining her math homework to Rocky, who had become her most patient study partner, she heard an unfamiliar sound. At first, she couldn't place it, a soft thump against the floor. Looking over, she saw Rocky's tail moving, not quite a wag yet, but a definite, purposeful movement. She pulled out her phone and recorded it, her hands shaking with excitement. The shelter staff needed to see this. The girl's father noticed other changes too. Rocky's temperature was stabilizing, and he was keeping down small amounts of food. The infections that had resisted treatment at the shelter were finally showing signs of improvement. "It's not just the medicine," he told his daughter. "You're giving him a reason to fight." Every small victory was celebrated. The first time Rocky finished a whole bowl of food, the family had a quiet party in his room. When he started responding to his name, the girl made a video to share with the shelter volunteers who had cared for him. Each step forward, no matter how tiny, was proof that their last-minute decision had been the right one. Even the girl's teachers noticed a change in her. She'd always been a good student, but now she had a new sense of purpose. She started doing extra research on animal behavior and rehabilitation, bringing what she learned home to help Rocky. Her biology teacher even invited her to give a presentation to the class about animal care and the importance of not giving up on those who needed help the most. As the second week drew to a close, something magical happened. The girl was dozing off over her history book when she felt a gentle pressure on her hand. Rocky had rested his head on her palm, his eyes meeting hers with a look that seemed to say thank you. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood moment, just a quiet connection between two souls, one who needed saving and one who refused to give up. That night, for the first time since his rescue, Rocky slept soundly through the night, his breathing deep and regular. The girl stayed awake a little longer, watching him rest, knowing that while they still had a long way to go, they'd already come so far from that desperate afternoon at the shelter. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest miracles start with the smallest moments of faith. 3 weeks into Rocky's recovery, the girl sat down at her desk and opened her rehabilitation journal. The pages were filled with daily notes, treatment updates, and little victories that might seem small to others, but meant the world to those who had almost lost hope. She had a new plan to present to Dr. Lee, one that combined everything they'd learned about what worked for Rocky. The morning started with their new routine. Rocky now greeted her with gentle tail wags when she brought his breakfast, a special mix of nutrients her father had helped create. His appetite had improved so much that they'd had to put a slow feed bowl to keep him from eating too quickly. It was hard to believe this was the same dog who had refused food just weeks ago. "Look at this," the girl's father said during the morning checkup, pointing to the patches of new fur starting to grow on Rocky's back. The mange was slowly retreating, thanks to a combination of traditional medicine and natural remedies. They'd discovered that adding coconut oil to his diet and using gentle oatmeal baths helped soothe his irritated skin. The girl had learned this from late-night research and conversations with holistic veterinarians online. Each day now had its own special focus. Mondays were for hydrotherapy, gentle exercises in their backyard kiddie pool, which helped strengthen Rocky's muscles without putting too much strain on his body. The girl would sit by the pool's edge, encouraging him with soft words as he grew more confident in the water. These sessions always ended with him shaking water all over her, making them both laugh. Yes, Rocky had learned to laugh in his own dog way. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for socialization training. They'd sit on the front porch, watching the world go by. At first, Rocky would tense up at every passing car or person, but now he was learning to stay calm. The neighbors had become part of his support system, walking by slowly and speaking softly to him. An elderly lady from across the street even brought him homemade dog treats every week. The most challenging days were Wednesdays, medical checkup day at the shelter. But even these had become easier. Rocky no longer trembled when they entered the building. Instead, he'd walk in with his head held higher, greeting his old friends among the staff with gentle tail wags. The shelter workers could hardly believe the transformation. Rita would often sit with tears in her eyes, watching the dog they'd almost lost now showing such signs of life. One particularly special moment came during a therapy session in the backyard. The girl was doing gentle massage on Rocky's shoulders, something that helped with his muscle tension when a butterfly landed on his nose. In the past, any sudden movement would have made him flinch. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, watching the delicate creature with curious eyes until it fluttered away. The girl quickly snapped a picture. These were the moments that showed how far he'd come. The treatment plan had evolved as they learned more about Rocky's needs. They discovered he responded well to aromatherapy, lavender helped him relax during thunderstorms, and peppermint seemed to perk him up on low-energy days. The girl's mother, who had initially been nervous about having a sick pit bull in the house, now spent her evenings researching essential oils safe for dogs. Physical therapy became a family affair. The girl's father designed an obstacle course in the backyard using old pillows and cardboard boxes. They'd guide Rocky through it, building his strength and confidence. What started as a medical necessity turned into a game they all looked forward to. Rocky's eyes would light up whenever they brought out the equipment, knowing it was playtime. The girl kept detailed records of everything: his weight gains, improvements in blood work, the growing patches of healthy fur. She created a photo journal showing his progress, which became an inspiration at the shelter. When other families came in, uncertain about adopting dogs with medical issues, the staff would share Rocky's story. His journey was proving that with love, patience, and the right care, amazing transformations were possible. 1 month into his rehabilitation, they had their biggest breakthrough yet. During the evening therapy session, Rocky brought the girl his favorite toy, a soft blue ball they'd given him weeks ago that he'd never touched. He placed it gently in her lap and backed up, play bowing for the first time. The whole family gathered to watch as the girl rolled the ball across the floor, and Rocky, their formerly sick and hopeless dog, played like a puppy. That night, as Rocky slept peacefully in his bed, now moved next to the girls, the family sat down to update his care plan. The emergency phase was over. Now they could focus on building his strength and helping him become the dog he was always meant to be. The girl added a new page to her journal, titling it Rocky's Next Chapter. The words flowed easily as she wrote about their next goals, her heart full of pride for how far they'd come and excitement for the journey ahead. Outside, a gentle rain fell, and Mozart played softly from the speaker, the same piece that had first caught Rocky's attention in the shelter. But now, instead of a last comfort for a dying dog, it was the soundtrack to a miracle in progress, a testament to what can happen when someone believes in second chances. The transformation over the next 3 months was nothing short of remarkable. Where once there had been patches of raw, infected skin, healthy fur now grew in thick and glossy. Rocky's eyes, previously dulled by pain and hopelessness, now sparkled with life and joy. But the physical changes were just the beginning of his amazing journey. One sunny morning, while the girl was getting ready for school, she heard excited barking from downstairs. This was new. Rocky rarely barked at all. She rushed down to find him standing at the back door, tail wagging furiously as he watched a squirrel in the yard. Her mother was already there, laughing at his playful excitement. "He's acting like a normal dog," she said, wiping happy tears from her eyes. Who would have thought we'd see this day? The daily walks, which had started as short therapy sessions, had turned into adventures. Rocky now pulled gently on his leash, eager to explore the neighborhood. Children who had once crossed the street at the sight of the sick pit bull now asked to pet him. He'd sit patiently, his tail sweeping the ground as tiny hands gently patted his head. The girl would tell them his story, watching their eyes grow wide with amazement at before and after photos on her phone. Rocky's medical file at the shelter had become a source of hope for the staff. Dr. Lee often used it as a teaching tool for veterinary students who came to volunteer. "Sometimes," he'd tell them, "the most important medicine isn't in our cabinets. It's in the dedication of people who refuse to give up." The students would gather around Rocky during his checkups, amazed by his blood work results and the way his skin had healed. The girl's father had started a blog documenting Rocky's recovery methods, sharing what they'd learned about combining traditional and alternative treatments. Pet owners from around the city began reaching out, asking for advice about their own dog's health issues. The local pet store even invited them to give a presentation about natural remedies and rehabilitation techniques. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Rocky's journey was how he began helping others. The girl had noticed how gentle he was with smaller animals. One day, they'd found a kitten in their garden, barely old enough to walk. While the family worried about how Rocky would react, he surprised them all by becoming the kitten's protector, letting it snuggle against his belly for warmth and cleaning its tiny face with gentle licks. This discovery led to a new chapter in Rocky's story. The shelter asked if he could help socialize other dogs who were struggling to adjust. Twice a week, they'd bring in nervous or fearful dogs to meet him. Rocky seemed to know exactly what each one needed, playing with the energetic ones, lying quietly near the scared ones, showing them by example that humans could be trusted. Word spread about the miracle pit bull who had gone from death's door to becoming a healing presence for other animals. A local news station came to do a story about him. The girl's family worried about how Rocky would handle the cameras and crew, but he remained his calm, gentle self, even offering his favorite toy to the cameraman. The story aired during the evening news, showing footage of Rocky playing in the backyard, helping at the shelter, and giving kisses to his young rescuer. The response was overwhelming. The shelter's phone started ringing nonstop with people wanting to help other dogs in need. Donations poured in, enough to create a special medical fund for cases like Rocky's. One particularly touching moment came when a young couple visited the shelter, looking sad and defeated. Their own dog had just been diagnosed with severe mange, and they were scared about the road ahead. The shelter staff introduced them to Rocky and his family. For over an hour, they sat in the play yard while the girls shared their journey, the treatments that worked, the challenges they'd faced, the little victories that kept them going. Rocky sat between them, leaning against their legs as if offering his own silent encouragement. As summer approached, the girl's family decided to organize a second chance celebration at the shelter. They set up information booths about pet rehabilitation, had veterinarians giving free consultations, and most importantly, helped other families see the potential in animals that might otherwise be overlooked. Rocky was the star of the show, greeting visitors with his signature gentle wags and showing everyone what love and dedication could achieve. The event ended with a special moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes. The shelter staff gathered around Rocky, comparing his current photos with the ones from that desperate day when he'd almost been put down. Rita, who had been there from the beginning, knelt beside him and received a gentle kiss on her cheek. "You proved us all wrong, sweet boy," she whispered, hugging him close, "and we couldn't be happier about it." That evening, as the girl sat doing her homework, Rocky dozed peacefully beside her desk. His journey had not just saved his own life, it had created ripples of hope that were still spreading outward, touching other lives, inspiring other rescues. The medical journal she'd started all those months ago had become a guidebook for others, proof that sometimes the biggest miracles start with a single person believing in a second chance. 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon when a young girl's determination changed everything. On a bright Sunday morning, Rocky bounded through the shelter's front doors, his healthy coat gleaming in the sunlight, his tail wagging with joy. This wasn't just another visit. Today was special. The shelter was hosting its first Rocky's Heroes adoption event, named in honor of the dog who had inspired so many. The transformation was complete. Looking at Rocky now, no one would guess this was the same dog who had once laid dying in a kennel. His chocolate-brown fur had grown back thick and glossy, his eyes sparkled with life, and his gentle spirit touched everyone he met. The girl's family had officially adopted him months ago, but his impact reached far beyond their home. The shelter had changed too. Where once there had been a single urgent medical cat fund, there was now an entire program dedicated to helping dogs with severe health issues. They called it the Second Chance Program, and Rocky's before and after photos hung prominently on the wall, reminding everyone that miracles were possible with enough love and dedication. During the adoption event, Rocky worked his magic. He seemed to know exactly which potential adopters needed encouragement, gently approaching nervous families and showing them that even big dogs could be gentle souls. When a timid couple came to look at a pit bull mix with similar health issues to what Rocky had faced, he sat quietly beside them while the girls shared their story of recovery. "We almost gave up," she told them, scratching Rocky's ears. "But look at him now." Rocky responded by rolling over for belly rubs, making everyone laugh. The couple filled out adoption papers that same day, inspired by the living proof of what patience and love could achieve. The girl's rehabilitation journal had become a valuable resource. Local veterinarians now requested copies to share with other families facing similar challenges. Her detailed notes about natural remedies, physical therapy techniques, and the emotional aspects of animal recovery were helping others create their own success stories. She'd even started mentoring younger shelter volunteers, teaching them that every animal deserved a chance to show who they could become. Rocky's special connection with other animals had led to an unexpected development. The shelter now used him as a therapy dog for new arrivals, especially those who were scared or struggling to adjust. His calm presence helped even the most traumatized dogs feel safe. The staff would watch in amazement as Rocky would lie down near a nervous newcomer's kennel, staying there until the other dog began to relax. The local community had embraced Rocky's story in ways no one expected. Schools invited the girl and Rocky to talk about animal care and the importance of not judging by appearances. Business owners put donation jars on their counters to support the Second Chance program. Even the city council took notice, working with the shelter to create better policies for handling animals with medical needs. One of the most touching moments came when a group of nursing students visited the shelter. They were studying the healing power of human-animal connections, and Rocky's story had caught their attention. As the girl's father explained how they'd combined medical treatment with emotional support, Rocky demonstrated perfectly by going to comfort a crying student who was missing her own dog back home. The girl's mother, who had once been nervous about having a sick pit bull in their home, had become one of Rocky's biggest advocates. She volunteered to help other families learning to care for dogs with special needs, sharing the practical tips she'd learned during Rocky's recovery. "It's not always easy," she'd tell them, "but it's always worth it." On this special day, as families filled the shelter looking for their own perfect match, Rocky showed just how far he'd come. A small child accidentally dropped a box of toys, creating a loud crash. Instead of being startled, Rocky calmly helped the kid pick them up, carrying toys one by one in his gentle mouth. The shelter staff, remembering how he once flinched at the smallest sounds, wiped tears from their eyes. The day ended with a beautiful sight. 5 dogs with medical issues, the kind that might have once seemed unadoptable, went home with loving families. Each new owner left with a copy of Rocky's recovery guide, full of hope and determination to create their own success story. As the last family drove away, Rocky sat between his girl and Reba, his tail sweeping the floor as they watched another happy ending unfold. That evening, back at home, the family gathered in the living room while Rocky dozed on his favorite spot on the couch. The classical music that had once been his only comfort now played softly in the background, no longer a lifeline but a gentle reminder of how far they'd come. The girl worked on updating their blog, adding pictures from the day's event, while Rocky dreamed his happy dreams. On the shelf above the desk sat a frame containing the torn pieces of Rocky's original euthanasia paperwork, preserved as a reminder that sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make with our hearts. Below it, a new sign read, "Every ending is just a new beginning." Rocky's story had become more than just a tale of one dog's recovery. It was proof that love, patience, and refusing to give up could create ripples of hope that touched countless lives.